Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our Lunch and Learn. Our Lunch and Learn is funded by the Accessibility Directorate, and we would like to acknowledge that Nova Scotia is home to over 13 bands and 42 First Nation communities. We are in the traditional ancestral lands of the Mi'kmaq, known as the Mi'kma'ki. As Treaty people, we're committed to reconciliation. Oh, we would also like to recognize that Nova Scotia is home to over 50 African Nova Scotian communities whose culture, heritage, and histories have been and remain a key part of this province for more than 400 years. We honor and offer gratitude to those ancestors of African descent who came before us to this land. And today we have a fabulous facilitator, Erin Casey, who's going to be talking about inclusive language for our Lunch and Learn. And Erin Casey is the plain language expert on a crusade to make words and communications more accessible for all users. So you can take it away, Erin.
Hi. Hi, everyone. Nice small group today. Maybe we'll have a few more people pop in. So this is kind of a quick introduction to inclusive and unbiased language. And so I have some notes. So if you hear me shuffling paper, just that's the old-fashioned part of me that's doing that. So Roxanne gave me a little intro, and so I am a middle-aged woman of European descent. I'm wearing round bluish green glasses, and my favorite t-shirt today, which has an axolotl on it. This little guy, isn't he cute? Usually I dress up, but today I thought it's cash. And I also like to joke that I'm coming to you live from my closet, which is quite true, but I do have a lot of clothes hanging up in my office. So, so as Roxanne said, I've developed some subject matter expertise in plain language, inclusive and accessible communication. And I've actually been working in and on plain language since the mid-90s. Plain language had a bit of a moment back then, and particularly as it relates to health information. And I sometimes like to tell the very tiny story that when I was about 26, one of the projects I was working on for a nonprofit women's organization was creating plain language resources about menopause. So if only I remembered any of it, it would have probably served me quite well. I'm the parent of two young adults who are autistic. And my older kid, my son, also is hearing impaired and has epilepsy. So I definitely live, with and around disability all the time. And someone yesterday said to me, "Oh, neurodiversity celebration week is coming up." And I said, "Every week is neurodiversity celebration week at my house." My pronouns, and I actually didn't add them, but I typically use she or they. Either one is fine. And if you would like to add your pronouns to your name, I invite you to do that. And this, like I said, it's just a quick review, and I will miss things. Feel free to chime in at any time. This is very relaxed. And the other thing I would say is a bit of a content warning. There are a few terms in my presentation that, because I'm giving examples and then alternatives, that could be considered offensive or upsetting. I did try to minimize that, but there are some. And so some of this language is, we have to be sensitive to it. And I do have one very brief mention to suicide, also just in terms of terminology. So with that, let us begin. I'm going to get my slideshow up. There we go. There. Okay. So, inclusive language. We're all in this together. So what is inclusive language? And typically I do read my slides out loud as an accessibility practice. So what is inclusive language? Inclusive language uses words or expressions that include everyone, no matter who they are or how they identify. It fosters respect and helps all of us feel like we belong, and it's kind and builds community. Inclusive language does not use words or expressions that insult, offend, exclude, or harm people. And it does not add stigma and discrimination against equity-seeking people and groups. So language is always changing, as we all know, and what's acceptable today might not be next week or next year. And so that's another thing, obviously to always be aware of, is that these kinds of things are always evolving. So why is it important to use inclusive language? We all want to feel seen and understood. And we all also want to be represented in media, art, education, politics, recreation, society. We want to see ourselves reflected back. And it isn't just about getting pronouns right or avoiding outdated terms. Many words and expressions that we use every day and that we're very used to using to the point where we don't notice them have roots in racist, sexist, homophobic, ableist, and other discriminatory practices. And really one of the most important things you can do is being open to learning and being corrected. So inclusive language, we hear the word bias a lot. So inclusive language is unbiased, but what is bias? A bias is a prejudice for or against a person, group, idea, or thing. And biases usually involve unfair comparisons between two or more people, groups, ideas, or things, that one thing is better than another or worse than another. And they are typically based on stereotypes. So biases can be about all kinds of things. They can be about gender or sexuality, culture, background, race, physical and mental health, age, religion, socioeconomic background, and of course, many, many other things. And we all have biases, whether we're aware of them or not. And I imagine there's a good chance that some people here, if not all, have engaged in training or some learning about unconscious bias. And absolutely, we all have them, everyone, even those of us most committed to not having them, have them. I think some things to think about when you're thinking about unbiased and inclusive language would be to sort of ask yourself things like, do you know the origin of this word or expression that you're using? Like, are there racist, ableist, sexist, homophobic origins to that? So a term that comes up a lot is grandfathered, right? This is a term that we hear even sometimes in legal documents, but it is a sexist term. Or a term like master bedroom or master suite. These are outdated terms based on racist ideology, but they're so embedded in our everyday language that sometimes we don't even think about them. So the next few slides, I'm just going to give you like a very few examples of alternatives you can use instead of, I guess, more traditional traditional is the word, but or more what you might hear more usually. And some of these things are already starting to change. So, oh, well, should we let Heather in? Here we go. So this slide is really more about like gender and sexuality. So one example, each voter should fill in his or her registration card. So if anybody here, I don't know if anyone here was in my lunch and learn about pronouns a few weeks ago, but of course we talked exclusively about this, but the gender neutral they, them, their, this is where this is a star, right? Every voter should fill out their registration card. Very easy fix. Husbands and wives are invited. Spouses or partners are welcome. Like, again, very easy fix. It's interesting. I had a conversation with, I can't remember her name now, but it was at the anti-racism symposium about some of this kind of terminology. And she was telling me about the word family and how in her municipality, they're trying to, in a way, like dive into what that word even means and how can they make that word more inclusive. So traditionally we think, two parents, usually a mom and dad, but two parents and two kids or three kids. So they're really trying to unpack like what the word family means for them and their municipality and what that's describing. Obvious ones: policeman, chairman, businessman, cleaning lady, police officer, chair, business owner, cleaner, etc. Just neutralize it. And so most terms you can just easily neutralize. Girls in the office, women in the office, and those of us who identify as women often very casually refer to each other and ourselves as girls. This is not comfortable for everybody, right? And we're all adults, so always better to say women. I'm just a word on that too. Sometimes you're hearing people say females. The females in the office, all went to get coffee. As a professional communicator, I discourage that. People, I think, go to it because it feels more, I don't know, scientific or something, or factual. To me, that's a word you use to describe someone's, biology, and in particular, an animal. So in general, instead of something like female entrepreneurs, women entrepreneurs, or women and gender diverse entrepreneurs. Man the office or manpower. I've noticed this one creeping back into language. It had kind of disappeared between the mid 80s and maybe about 5 years ago. But I've seen this creeping back in as a piece of jargon. There's absolutely no need of it. You can staff your office and you can refer to your workforce. Gay marriage, it's just marriage. And gay community, 2S LGBTQ plus community. You can also say gender diverse community if and there are certain areas where you can be more specific. And I'm going to come back a little bit to in-group versus out-group language. And if I forget to do that, somebody remind me. But around like what the group itself might call itself, but what people who are not members of that group can legitimately say to describe them. This is one you hear still quite a bit: transgendered. No, it's transgender or trans. I should pause. Do we have any questions from our small but mighty group? No. Okay. Why is that not going? There we go. So addressing people: Mr. or Mrs., sir or madam. Very traditional. You still see it quite a bit. And you still, when filling out a form, will often be asked for your honorific or salutation. Most of the time you can just skip it. Just use people's names. And if you're addressing a group, if you go down to the bottom, ladies and guys and gals, or ladies and gentlemen, folks, people, friends, guests, everyone. There's almost always a way out. Yeah, Heather. What? Oh, I can't hear you. Are you muted?
I'm muted. Sorry about that.
Okay.
This one just popped up for me because in minutes in a municipal unit, you tend to refer to people who are speaking as Mr. So-and-so, because it's very formal. So this would be a tricky one to navigate because of the.
Yeah, I hear you.
I hadn't even thought about this one.
And in a way it sort of becomes a community standard, right? Like,
yeah,
this is how we do it, and this is a sign of respect. And I was going to say, I have a note here. You know what? Absolutely, some people, and probably in particular older adults, may still prefer to be referred to as Mrs. Casey or Ms. McCollum, or and by all means, if someone has a stated preference for that, absolutely, you should always comply with how someone would like to be spoken to or spoken about, for sure. I think when you're talking about minutes, my very pragmatic, blunt answer to that would be, you can leave it out. and just use somebody's surname, refer to them by their full name in the first instance. And after that, you can refer to them to their surname, unless there's more than one person with the same surname, in which you just use both names throughout the document. Now,
that's definitely something we should pick up on within all the municipalities so that we have
yeah,
a common approach.
And you know what? You might get a bit of pushback. Absolutely. You might. But it is one of those things where if everyone just starts doing it, you might have 5 or 10 minutes of backlash, and then probably people will forget about it.
Yeah. Thank you. I hadn't even thought of that one.
Yeah. And you know what? I hadn't thought about that either, but you're absolutely right. In a way, it's sort of take a journalistic approach, right? If you read an article, a news article, that's how they would do it.
Yeah.
Typically leave out the honorifics.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Words like landlord or landlady, property owner. So sometimes it's a completely different word, right? It's not necessarily a neutral version of the same word. Sometimes it's a completely different word. Councilman or councilwoman, counselor. This is where a word like warden, comes in handy because it's gender neutral to begin with. And I think probably for the most part, most municipalities say counselor anyway. I have a little note here. Don't let tradition get in the way of inclusion, which kind of speaks to what you were asking, Heather. And also just don't be afraid to be lighthearted, right? Like in a lot of situations, being lighthearted is perfectly fine. And saying, folks, friends, like being warm in that way actually is very welcoming and people appreciate that. All right. Race, culture, and ethnicity. So this is a slide, where we're going to, run into some more challenging ideas. And I've just picked a few, what I think of as sort of more common examples of stuff you probably could hear any day of the week. A big one is our Indigenous peoples. So Canada's Indigenous peoples, Nova Scotia's Indigenous peoples. They're just Indigenous peoples. They do not belong to the country, the province, the municipality. And when possible, to use language that is accurate and reflects the band name, the name of the nation. And if you don't know, ask. Make sure you know the right terminology and the appropriate and preferred terminology. Caucasian. So this is one that you still hear once in a while, but it is in fact a racist term based on inaccurate pseudoscience, essentially. So really we want to move more towards like someone of European descent or a European Nova Scotian or just white. And we do capitalize white and black typically. And the reason for that is that race is a social construct, so it's not biological. So someone who's considered black in one country might be considered white in another country. So they're often capitalized because they are used as group designations and proper nouns. So it helps to underscore the political nature of these words, and these words are not scientific. And that they're always being, contested. Another term that can be important to be familiar with is racialized person or person who is racialized or racialized community, because these terms express race as a social construct, so not as a scientific fact. So these kinds of ideas, are complex and yet very simple. And again, if you don't know, ask the question about how that community would like to be described. Okay, here's some expressions I still hear quite a bit. Have a powwow, get together or meet, or like low man or low person on the totem pole, a person with less seniority. So again, these are, outdated expressions that are anti-Indigenous and should be eradicated from your vocabulary. Another one very commonly that you still hear, sell down the river. So this refers to enslaved people in the US being sold further south where conditions were worse. So today it's often used to denote a betrayal. But again, it is an outdated and racist expression that we don't need to use anymore. Blacklists and whitelists. Again, this is the idea that black is bad, white is good. So even expressions like, it's really black and white, like these are really common expressions, but they're ones that we need to look at and find other ways to describe those ideas. Master plan, so main plan, overarching plan, slaving away, again, not an appropriate term, but still something that we hear a lot. So we're working very hard. So there are probably hundreds of these kinds of expressions. And what's important to do is ask yourself, what is the origin? What does this really mean? What's the story behind this? And another thing, I didn't mention this earlier, but also ask yourself, if you're using an expression, is it something that everyone would understand? So if you're not, if English is not your first language, for example, or if French is not your first language, are people going to understand this expression, which is ultimately a metaphor that they might not have the cultural context to understand? How are we doing? Any questions? Yeah. Roxanne.
I think it's so interesting how language sometimes is very related to like even generations, because like some of these terms I have not heard, but like I know that they are being used still today. And I know like the future generation, they use like some terms like slave, for example, and they use it in posts, they use it in like in their promotions and Instagram and social media, that it's not very inclusive because the older generations, they don't understand what those terms mean. So it's really interesting how we need to be more intentional on how we use language, to make it more accessible for all generations and for everyone.
Yeah. And it is hard work. Like you do have to look at it and look at it again and look at it again and say, like, is there anything in this post? Is there anything in this sign? Is there anything in this document? That I could say in a way that is less biased, more inclusive, or unbiased, more inclusive. And there's even like language, master slave language a lot in software and IT, right? That apparently it comes up a lot. This is not my area of expertise, but when I was researching for this presentation, I ran across that a lot. So, like I said, so many of these words and phrases are just like embedded in how we speak. And it takes a generation or two for that to shift sometimes as well. Yeah. Okay, this one's always interesting to me because like sort of disability is where I live. I think in many ways, this is health and ability. And when I say health, it's physical health, mental health, is one of an area where we have a really long way to go in terms of language. And so this first word is kind of my nemesis, lame. And I mean, I probably hear people say that like 10 times a day. Oh, that's lame. Oh, this is really lame. And it's ableist, right? It like, if you stop for just like 5 seconds and think about that word and what it really means, and we use it to mean that something is boring or stupid or not worth our time, or like the connotations are very clear. So, but this is one that I've had some trouble eradicating from my own vocabulary, although I think I'm pretty much there now. But now that I'm there, I hear it all the time. And then I'm in a position of, well, do I say anything, right? Do I correct someone? Do I speak up? And I'm going to be honest, like most of us probably, I don't always. So that's my next step on this, my own personal process with this word is, okay, I've got that out of my own mouth. So, how do I find ways of calling people in to understanding why they shouldn't use it either? Dumb, right? Again, same kind of thing, right? And he's, oh God, that's dumb. In fact, our prime minister yesterday used that word to describe his colleague to the south. And again, probably not a word we should be using, right? So when we say something's dumb, what we really mean is, oh, it doesn't make sense. It's a bad idea. We think it's stupid. And even the word stupid is something that is a word that should be used with great care. So on to sort of ableist language around a physical disability. We often hear, oh, he's in a wheelchair, right? Oh, we have to make sure the meeting room is accessible because he's in a wheelchair, the person who's coming. Really simple one. He uses a wheelchair or he is a wheelchair user. So just slight change, but it's more about person being, centering the person. Another big one you hear all the time, they suffer from autism. That's one that I hear sometimes, or they're battling autism, or they're battling, whatever it is. And again, not an inclusive way to talk about somebody. So you can just say they have a condition or they live with a condition. So my son, for example, who has epilepsy, you could say he lives with epilepsy. I would just say he has epilepsy. And in fact, he himself would probably say he's epileptic. Now, that's his choice. That is probably not something I would say about him. Which brings me to person first versus identity first language. So in disability spaces, typically we're encouraged to use person first language. So persons with disabilities, a person with cerebral palsy, a person with a mental illness. Now, there are exceptions to this. There are communities, the autistic community, very specifically, many, in fact, I would say the majority of autistic people prefer to be called autistic people, not people with autism. That is because most people consider it to be integral to who they are as a person, much like being gay would be. So my younger kid says, well, I'm not a person with autism, just like, I'm not a person with gay. Right. So for my kids and many of the autistic people I know, they would prefer to be called autistic people. And another example of that might be deaf people. So people are deaf as in the physical state of being deaf, but they're also capital D deaf, which is deaf culture. So they might describe themselves as a deaf person. And there are some other examples of that as well. And again, up to the person that you're addressing. And if you're not sure, it's important to ask. So these are also tough ones. Crazy, mental, bonkers, definitely like biased against people who struggle with their mental health. So, when we say these things, what we really mean a lot of the time is like, it's too much. It's, it doesn't make sense. It's irrational, weird, zany, senseless, wild, outlandish. Like there's so many, get that thesaurus out, because there are so many alternatives. But these can be really hard ones to get out of your vocabulary as well, particularly the word crazy, right? We use that all the time. But definitely something to think about. So here's another sort of triggering word, and often we'll just say the R word, a slur, commonly accepted now as a slur to describe people with intellectual disabilities. And unfortunately, that word has morphed into using the second syllable tard in addition to some other, first syllable to describe all manner of, people, who are perceived to be anything from unintelligent to evil. So, and I've run into people who would never say the R word, but then I hear them say another word that involves the word tard. And I'm like, you do realize where that comes from. So this is one that I don't hesitate to call out. And unfortunately, you still hear it. It probably happens to me 2 or 3 times a year still that I hear the R word from someone who should definitely know better. And that one, like I said, I have no problem jumping in and saying, we don't say that here. So if you must say anything, try to be accurate. So ignorant, narrow-minded, unwise. There are some other options as well. And finally, the phrase committed suicide. So we still hear this a lot. And of course, like again, part of our normal vocabulary, but it's actually a legal term, kind of like committing murder or committing fraud, because it used to be illegal. And an incredible source of shame, of course, as well. And so now we prefer to use died by suicide. I've even heard some people say that someone suicided. So just something to be sensitive to. It's not a crime, and it is not something to which we should attach shame. So there are a lot of ableist words and expressions embedded in how we talk every day. And so don't beat yourself up too much, but you'll probably come away from today thinking to yourself, okay, I have a little bit of work to do on this one for sure. And it is a step-by-step process. And like I said, first get it out of your own vocabulary, and then you can work on building up the courage over time to challenge other people. Any questions? Okay. Age. Well, I think we're all probably guilty of this. So instead of words like elderly, old people, the aged, older people, older adults, some people don't mind seniors. And I know that there are even, community spaces called, seniors clubs. And so, there's some good judgment to be exercised here. Kids. I mean, kids is a perfectly acceptable word in casual conversation. But I think, for our purposes, try to be, again, more accurate. Children, young people. And I was, when I put this in here, I was also thinking about how it's easy, once you get older, you get into middle age, to refer to people who are like maybe in their 20s as kids. Oh, they're just kids. It's like, no, they're young adults. Girls and boys. I think I covered this a little bit on a previous slide. Women, men, and gender diverse people. And now this is a big one right now. The words for the various sort of generations of people, millennial, Gen Z, Gen X, boomer. It's useful shorthand, but it's not something that should be in our professional vocabulary, because these terms are really embedded in stereotypes and very fraught with stereotypes. And it's an easy way to dismiss somebody, right? I mean, I don't know if anyone else here is old enough, and I am solidly Gen X, but to have had a younger person say to you, okay, boomer, right? And we laugh about it, but it is discriminatory. So these kinds of, if you need to refer to people's ages at all, be accurate, be between the ages of 20 and 30, between the ages of 30 and 40, whatever you need to do. And this is also one that I think is sort of right now, like still kind of acceptable, and I feel that in a few years it won't be, and there'll be more attention paid to that. All right. Slurp of water. How are we doing for time? Oh, we're good. So overcoming objections. We've talked a little bit about that, I think, with, I talked to you about that, Heather. Some things that people might say to you if you're asking them to use more inclusive language, or if you're pointing out particular words or phrases, what's the big deal? It's just an expression, right? Doesn't hurt anybody. Not true, right? We all need to feel included. We all need to feel that we're welcome. We all need to feel that we're represented. We all need to feel that we have power and control over our lives. And that is not limited to, say, people who look like me. I'm uncomfortable pointing this out to people. Yes, it is uncomfortable. Correcting people is uncomfortable. And I think with the language stuff, you are going to have people who take it personally, who feel like they've been personally attacked. And they're not, right? And I think to come at this with patience and kindness is the key. And I like to use, like, we say, oh, I got to call somebody out on, saying the R word. And sometimes it's helpful to just take a step back and say, okay, maybe I need to call someone in. And I actually had an experience that happened to me maybe 3 years ago. And I was actually looking for someone to subcontract to. I had a big project and I needed another writer to come in and help me with some things. And we were on the phone one day, and I had known her for probably a few years. We weren't friends, but I'd known her, from professional circles for a long time. And we were chatting on the phone, and she used the R word. And I was astonished. And I didn't say anything. I just thought, okay. And she was trying, to sell herself to me as a subcontractor. She was trying to, get work from me. And so I let her finish what she was saying, and I gave myself a moment to gather my thoughts. And then I said, I'm really concerned about your use of the R word. And here, and just, that here is why it's objectionable to me. It's considered a slur. And I very, calmly explained. I said, and it was interesting. Her reaction was something like, oh, I'm from Cape Breton. People say that there all the time. And I just said, well, no, that's not true. And I didn't say that to her, but I just kind of let her. So people are going to feel at times attacked, and they are going to take it personally. But I think it's important not to take it personally back, if that makes sense. Like, let them be with it. And in my experience, 9 times out of 10, the person will come back to you and say, you were right about that. I was embarrassed. And you've given me something to think about. And as a person receiving a correction, there's a lesson in that too, right? Just if someone says to you, I don't think you should be using that word, it's totally natural to be like, I'm not a bad person. I'm nice. It's like, no. This is a systemic issue. Take a deep breath, and one of my favorite phrases that I've used a few times in the last year or two is, thank you for the education. I'm going to think about what you said. And even if you don't agree or don't get it, that's a way to acknowledge what this person has said to you and give yourself some time to step back and reflect. There's no one in the office, this room, our town, who belongs to that group. So, maybe you hear that sometimes. Oh, well, we don't have any, there are no Black people in the room. We don't have any Indigenous people living in this town. I don't know any gay people. Probably none of these things are true. And the very dark side of it, which is times when, for example, a person might believe they're in an all-white space and may say something racist, and thinking that it is safe to do that. So that's a whole other lunch and learn, right? But that's kind of the worst scenario in that situation. And I think the answer to that is, you don't know that. You don't know that there's no one in this room. You don't know that there's no one in this town. Because you don't. And it doesn't matter. This is not how we talk about people. I'm afraid I'll make a mistake and be embarrassed. Yes, you will. And yes, you will. And it's okay. And then finally, as with any kind of change, it's too hard. Everyone knows what I mean anyway. And I think this is where we can talk about intention and impact, right? Well, I didn't mean that. I didn't mean it that way. That wasn't what I intended. And what matters is an impact. So that's another opportunity to help someone understand that the impact that they may have had on other people or on a group. This is not easy work, right? Like this equity work is not easy work. And so I thank you for being here, and I thank you for thinking about it, and I thank you for caring. But norms do change, right? And all of us in our lifetime have seen that happen. And norms only change if we challenge them. And really, like, any amount of discomfort that you may feel in challenging biased language pales in comparison to feeling discriminated against, excluded, harassed, or unsafe. And many people do every day. So just some final thoughts. Be an ally, speak up, educate, correct, be open to learning, and take responsibility for educating yourself. And I always like to say this, and I said this about pronouns too, you don't have to get it right. You actually don't have to understand or even agree with someone's preferences around how they're being addressed or how a group would like to be addressed. You don't have to agree or understand, to just do what is asked of you and what is preferred. So the words and expressions we use are deeply rooted in cultural beliefs and norms, but we're responsible for educating ourselves about how language is evolving and to keep educating ourselves. So don't leave it to members of equity-seeking groups to do the work of educating you or educating the people around you. Take that on. There's so much good information online. Just Google inclusive language. And I have the city of Edmonton has a really nice guide. I'm going to send the link to Roxanne and she can share it with you. And I use that actually for a lot of the examples here. And it's recent. I think it's last year. And I thought it was really good and easy to understand, but there are tons of resources out there. And if you don't know, you can usually very easily find out. Oh yeah, I wanted to talk about in-group and out-group naming a little bit. So within a group, so within an equity-seeking group, let's say the 2S LGBTQ plus community. Within that group, there are all kinds of words that are used that would be considered a slur if someone outside of that group was using them. Or even a word like gay. Like a lot of younger people who belong to that community just say, I'm gay, as a catch-all term. So it used to be gay referred typically only to gay men. And then it became kind of more broad, like encompass anybody who was attracted to people of the same gender. And now gay apparently is much broader within the community. And if you're, 17 and you're bisexual, then you're going to call yourself gay. So, but if you're outside that group, you're not going to use that word in that way. And anyone who's ever listened to rap music knows that, within some segments of the Black community, the N-word is acceptable. But obviously this is not a word that other people are going to use. So it's really important to understand that and use good judgment. Oh, another example that comes up in the disability space, you may have heard the word crip, right? Like a dear friend of mine who's a wheelchair user talks about accessible parking spots as crip spots. I am not going to use that word, right? But that is a word that within that community is acceptable shorthand. So again, do your homework. And just a few more thoughts, don't stop at the basics, find ways to be an ally to every member of your community. And I'm going to invite people to add things to this list after I'm done. Educate yourself and others, be proactive, not reactive. Update forms and public materials to be reflective of your actual community. Make signage and other public materials inclusive. And when I say this, I mean not just the language, but the images, right? Make sure that you're showing images of all different people who look different, people have different abilities. Just make sure that there is like representation. Learn about laws and policies, update and reform the ones that aren't inclusive. Be openly and vocally supportive. Have those difficult conversations and interrupt harassment and microaggressions. Because often this language amounts to microaggressions, right? Like if people use these, certain kinds of words and phrases, it can create an absolutely hostile environment. Use images and examples of diverse people in your materials. Yeah, representation matters. So that's it for me, but I'm open. Oh, I have a couple more. Sorry, on my other page. Normalize using inclusive language when you write and speak, even and especially internally. So I always say that about plain language too. People say, well, this is just for external. I'm like, no. We should all be speaking clearly and plainly, internally and externally. Same thing applies here. And that also, again, speaks to like the council minutes, right? You can start dropping the honorifics and you might get a little bit of complaining and then people will forget about it. And finally, like create opportunities for everyone in your community to lead and to represent in actual practice in your community. Yeah. So that's it. We have a few minutes for questions if anyone wants to chat or challenge or add things that I missed.
I've been on the inclusive language kind of journey. I've been working to find an alternative to deadline that like works just in terms the visual that is brought up with that, and I feel uncomfortable with it, and so it's like I've been looking like due date or like completion date or like I've been like
haven't thought about that. I'm writing it down.
yeah, and I don't know like the roots of it, but I just know that visually I feel I don't like saying it, especially I think when you're looking at this, I'm with the province, and so kind of there's a, you know, there's some power dynamics there, and it's been on my mind lately in terms of that one. So but sometimes it is tricky to find like the exact
Yeah, I think when in doubt, I always think just like describe it to yourself, right? You just
yeah,
said completion date. Yeah.
yeah,
Right.
like
It
target
feels
completion date.
it feels clunky the first 10 times you say it, but then it won't,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And people might say, do you mean deadline? And you'll say, yes, it's the completion date. Right?
Yeah.
Like there's some psychology to this too,
Yeah.
and if you're like leading culture change in these, like in a way, kind of subtle ways,
Yeah.
Yeah. But I'm actually going to find out about that word. And so,
Yeah, and maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's just my own yeah.
anyone
I found
else?
it interesting what you said about attaching a certain group to a province or country.
Mm,
How
like
many
our
times?
indigenous peoples, that one?
Yeah, and African Nova Scotian communities. How many times have I said that? I have to check that and just go back and
Yeah.
back.
So instead of Nova Scotia's African Nova Scotian communities, it's African Nova Scotian communities in Nova Scotia. Right. And maybe a lot of people don't care, but some people will.
Yeah.
Right? And it's more about denoting this idea of it's paternalistic, right? That's why it's problematic, because it's like, oh, these are ours. It's like, no, these are self-determining communities with their own culture and their own, heritage. And yeah, but yeah, it's a very common one that you don't think about very much. Any other thoughts? Anything I missed? Oh, I was going to say, I wrote a note and then I forgot to say it. One of my favorite, because when I put in like gay marriage, no, it's just marriage, right? The other word that popped into my head that you still hear sometimes is male nurse, which always kind of cracks me up, right? It's starting to fade because there's so many men in nursing now, but you do still hear it once in a while. It's like, well, no, he's just a nurse. Any other thoughts? Someone, I noticed a couple of comments, which I'm sorry I didn't respond to, but yeah, blacklist and whitelist and IT for blocking or allowing addresses. Yeah. Yeah, so that could be like the allowed list and the disallowed list, right? There's probably lots of different ways to say that.
If we can talk to every single IT management
Yeah.
program.
Yeah. I think I actually think, because I've picked up on this in several articles and blog posts that I've read. I think this is something that's being discussed and thought about in that field. It'll take a while to change, but you can make a decision in your own little space to use different words too. Yeah. And then getting comfortable with discomfort, boy, I guess like it's a tough one. Like when someone says a word or a phrase that you really have to like gird your loins, to say, okay, like, and always, obviously always ask yourself, is it safe? Is it safe for me to step into this and give feedback? It isn't always, and that's totally legitimate. But when it feels safe, and the more you do it, the less difficult it is too, right?
Yeah, if you can't hold space yourself for discomfort, you're not going to be much help to anybody. You need to be able to take a criticism.
Yeah.
And basically the people who say, oh, this is too hard, I just think that's cowardly. But
yeah. I mean, it is hard. Lots of things are hard. It
doesn't mean you shouldn't do them.
Yeah. And when I was preparing for my pronoun lunch and learn a few weeks ago, I spoke to a friend who's non-binary, and my younger child is also non-binary. And I was asking for, input and feedback and what are some things you really need people to know. And I think I was talking about that slide and saying, well, it's too hard. And I think my friend Abby was like, how do you respond to that? Boo hoo. Like,
I know my kid is transgender as well, and we just laugh at a lot of that stuff. It's just like, seriously, people change their names when they get married. How come that's okay?
so many
Deal.
and so exactly like just deal. It's okay, right? But I don't think we're socialized very well to take constructive criticism either, because you're absolutely right, Heather. Like, you have to create the space within yourself to receive, and I know, like, I've struggled with that with my mother sometimes, like my mother, who's a wonderful, kind, generous person who wants to know the right things to say and do, but still sometimes, giving that education is painful, and she can take it very, very personally. And but she's getting better. And she's 80. So listen, if she can do it, we can all do it.
My 80-year-old mother is the same. She tries really hard.
Yeah. We've almost got the they them pronouns down with my mom. We're about 80% there. Yeah. But yeah, I know for me, like, there are still words that I catch myself. It's almost like it comes out of your mouth and you just want to go, oh, like, but that's stage one of your process, and then gradually over time, those words, you can get rid of them. You can stop saying them. You absolutely can, but you have to want to do it.
Great. Thank you so much. I wish we could continue this conversation because it could go on for hours and hours and hours. And it's really great conversation to have. And Erin, thank you so much for the insight for the presentation on inclusive language and why it really matters. And this session has not just very informative, but also transformative in helping us to understand like the power of words and how they impact on creating community, how they impact on creating welcoming spaces for everyone included. And they say language can either build bridges or create barriers. And that's like really important. I love what Heather says. You really need to get comfortable with that discomfort. And kind of Zoe even mentioned the point of like deadline, how it makes her feel uncomfortable. And sometimes we're in meetings and we say words and it's like, oh, that makes you feel uncomfortable. And that kind of opens the door to learn more of what that word truly means in a community. So highlighting the importance of inclusive communication, you've given us a valuable tools as well as the resources to make workplaces, our communities, and interactions much more compassionate and understanding. So thank you so much for that.
You're welcome. I'm going to send you the link to that City of Edmonton
Please
guide,
do, yeah.
and you can send that out to folks. And I was going to say, you know what? I think in this conversation, I think it'd be really interesting to, at a conference or something at some point, have a facilitated role play of some kind around giving people a chance to practice giving feedback. It would be on an uncomfortable workshop and probably not many people would want to do it, but some people would. And if we could all practice as a group, because I know I need practice too, I think, and give feedback and help and coach each other, I think it'd be a lot of value in that. Just a thought. Yeah.
Great point.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. Nice to see you.
It's nice to see everyone. I just want to send a reminder also, these sessions are recorded, so they will be on our Municipal Ideas website by the end of today, and we'll have Erin's also the link that she mentioned, as well as next Wednesday, we have a session on alternative formats, content creation with an accessibility lens and AI, and this is with Sea Change Collab. It's with Corey Lawson will be presenting. Great session. We already did a session with her on Monday. And it's just great content because AI also has this unconscious bias attached to it. So she really addresses that piece as well. So that's going to be next Wednesday at 12 o'clock.
It'll be
Thank you
great.
so-
Corey and I work together all the time. It'll be awesome.
Yeah. Thank you so much for attending our Lunch and Learns, and I hope everyone has a great day.
Take care, everyone.